Andre Wilson stood at the edge of his newly purchased property, taking in the view with a deep sense of pride. After 15 years of working his way up at the FBI, specializing in cybersecurity investigations that often kept him away from home for weeks at a time, he had finally bought his dream home. The 3-acre property sat just outside the city limits, offering both privacy and space, two things Andre had learned to value in his line of work. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the overgrown lawn as Andre walked the perimeter, notepad in hand. The house itself needed work. The previous owners had left it vacant for nearly 2 years, but Andre saw nothing but potential. The solid brick structure had good bones, as his grandmother would say. The worn exterior and outdated features didn't bother him. They were just details that could be fixed with time and effort. This place is going to be something special, Andre muttered to himself, stopping to jot down measurements for the back deck he planned to rebuild. He wasn't wearing anything that would identify him as a federal agent, just worn jeans, a faded navy t-shirt, and work boots caked with mud from his earlier inspection of the property's small pond. Andre had purposely kept a low profile in his professional life. Working cybersecurity at the FBI meant he often collaborated with local police departments and other agencies on sensitive cases. He preferred to stay under the radar, letting his work speak for itself rather than his title. His colleagues respected him for his sharp mind and calm demeanor in tense situations. Andre had developed a reputation for being the person you wanted in the room when things got complicated. Growing up in a modest neighborhood across town, Andre had never imagined owning a place like this. His mother had raised him and his 2 sisters by herself, working double shifts as a nurse to make ends meet. She had instilled in them the value of education, hard work, and perseverance. Andre had taken those lessons to heart, working his way through college on scholarships and part-time jobs before joining the Bureau. The property had been on the market for months, its price gradually dropping as potential buyers were scared away by the amount of renovation needed. But where others saw problems, Andre saw opportunity. The moment he walked through the front door at the showing, something had clicked. This was the place he had been working toward his whole career. I need to fix that gutter before the rainy season hits, Andre thought, looking up at the sagging metal trough hanging precariously from the roof edge. He made another note in his pad before walking toward the old barn that sat about 50 yards from the main house. The barn was another project entirely. The previous owners had used it for storage, but Andre had different plans. With some work, it could become a perfect home office, somewhere he could work on sensitive cases away from prying eyes. The thick wooden walls could be insulated, and with the right security system, it would be an ideal space for a federal agent who occasionally brought work home. Andre pulled out the keys he'd received just 3 days earlier at the closing. The realtor had marked each one with colored tape, red for the front door, blue for the back, yellow for the barn. He smiled at the memory of the closing. The seller's agent had seemed surprised when Andre showed up in a suit, briefcase in hand, ready to sign the papers. There had been a moment when the agent looked at him with obvious confusion, as if trying to reconcile the young black man before him with the property's buyer. Their loss, Andre thought as he slid the yellow-tagged key into the barn's padlock. The heavy door swung open with a creak, revealing a dusty interior filled with cobwebs and the musty smell of disuse. Sunlight streamed through the gaps in the wooden slats, illuminating dancing dust particles in the air. Andre stepped inside, already mentally renovating the space. New flooring here, windows there, perhaps a small bathroom in that corner. His phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a text from his sister, Tamika. "How's the new place?" "Mom wants pictures." Andre grinned and stepped back outside to capture some photos. His mother had been thrilled when he told her about the purchase, immediately offering to help with painting and decorating. At 62, she still had more energy than most people half her age. He took several shots of the barn's exterior, then turned to capture the house in the distance. It wasn't much to look at yet: peeling paint, overgrown bushes crowding the foundation, shutters hanging askew. But it was his. Every mortgage payment would build something that was entirely his own, something he could be proud of. Andre had never been one for showing off his achievements. His apartment in the city was modest, his car reliable but not flashy. He saved his money, lived below his means, and focused on his long-term goals rather than immediate gratification. This property was the first time he had allowed himself to reach for something that felt almost extravagant. The afternoon was waning as Andre made his way back to the house. He had a list of contractors to call on Monday: roofers, electricians, plumbers. The house needed updated wiring, new pipes in some areas, and a complete overhaul of the heating system before winter arrived. It was a big project, but Andre had always enjoyed challenges. He climbed the 3 steps to the wraparound porch, another feature that had won him over during the viewing. In his mind, he could already see summer evenings spent here, maybe with a cold drink in hand after a long day at work. The porch swing needed to be replaced and the floorboards checked for rot, but the structure itself was sound. Using the red-tagged key, Andre unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The house smelled of dust and emptiness. The previous owners had taken all their furniture, leaving behind only the ghostly outlines on the walls where pictures had once hung. His footsteps echoed on the hardwood floors as he walked through the living room into the kitchen. The kitchen would need a complete renovation. The appliances were outdated, the cabinets worn, and the countertops chipped in several places. Still, the space was large, with plenty of natural light from the windows overlooking the backyard. Andre could envision hosting holiday dinners here, filling the house with the warmth and laughter that had been a hallmark of his childhood, despite their modest circumstances. He pulled out his phone again and opened the folder where he'd saved inspiration photos for each room. For months before finding this place, he had been collecting ideas, color schemes, furniture styles, layout options. Now that the house was actually his, those ideas could become reality. Andre had taken the next 2 weeks off work to get started on the renovations. His boss had been supportive, knowing how hard Andre had been working toward homeownership. The cybersecurity team could manage without him for a short while, and Andre had promised to be available by phone if any emergencies arose related to his ongoing cases. As the sun began to set, casting an orange glow through the dusty windows, Andre walked through each room one more time, making notes and taking measurements. Tomorrow he would return with cleaning supplies and begin the process of making this house livable. For tonight, though, he was content to simply be here, to breathe in the reality of ownership. Outside, a car drove slowly past the property, a neighbor perhaps curious about the new owner. Andre didn't mind. Soon enough, he would introduce himself properly to everyone nearby. He believed in being part of a community, in knowing the people around you and establishing those connections. It was something his mother had taught him. Neighbors looking out for each other made everyone safer. As darkness fell, Andre reluctantly prepared to leave. He wasn't staying at the house yet. It would be at least a few weeks before it was ready for that. For now, he would return to his apartment in the city, where boxes were already stacked in preparation for the move. He took one last look around the living room, picturing how it would look once he was finished with the renovations. New paint, refinished floors, comfortable furniture, and bookshelves filled with his collection of mystery novels and FBI history books. This room would be where he unwound after difficult cases, where he could leave the stresses of his job behind and simply be himself. Andre locked the front door behind him and walked to his car, a sensible, 5-year-old sedan that had served him well. As he pulled away from the property, he felt a sense of contentment that had been rare in his busy life. All the late nights, the dangerous operations, the countless hours poring over digital evidence in cybercrime cases, they had all led to this moment, to the achievement of a dream he had carried since childhood. Little did he know that his peaceful new beginning would soon be interrupted in a way that would test both his professional training and his personal resolve. The property that represented so much hope was about to become the setting for a confrontation that would expose ugly truths about assumptions, prejudice, and power. But for now, as Andre drove back toward the city with plans and possibilities filling his mind, the future seemed bright with promise. The weekend had finally arrived, and Andre couldn't wait to get back to his property. He'd spent the entire week at the FBI office, buried in a complex cybersecurity case that had kept him working late hours. But today was all about his new home. He loaded his truck with tools, cleaning supplies, and a cooler full of sandwiches and drinks. The spring morning was bright and clear as he drove out of the city, windows down, feeling the weight of the work week lifting from his shoulders. Andre pulled into the gravel driveway just before noon. The property looked different in the full daylight, both better and worse than he remembered. The grass had grown even taller in the week since his last visit, and the sunlight highlighted the peeling paint on the house's exterior. But it also illuminated the solid structure beneath the cosmetic issues and the beautiful mature oak trees that dotted the property. First things first, Andre muttered to himself as he unloaded his supplies. He'd brought his lawn mower and weed trimmer to tackle the overgrowth. Before diving into the interior renovations, he wanted the property to look cared for from the outside. He'd noticed a few neighbors driving by slowly during his last visit, and he knew first impressions mattered. For the next few hours, Andre worked steadily, cutting back the tall grass around the house and clearing the weeds that had nearly overtaken the front walkway. Sweat soaked through his gray t-shirt as the afternoon sun beat down. He paused occasionally to drink water and wipe his brow with a bandana. The physical labor felt good after a week of sitting at a computer, analyzing code and tracking digital footprints. After finishing the front yard, Andre decided to take measurements for the new fence he planned to install along the property line. He grabbed his measuring tape and notepad from the truck and walked toward the road. As he worked, he noticed a car slowing down as it passed. An older white woman stared at him from the passenger window, her expression unreadable. Andre nodded politely, but she didn't acknowledge him as the car continued down the road. "I'll have to make a point of introducing myself to the neighbors soon," Andre thought as he continued measuring. In his line of work, he'd learned that people were often more comfortable when they knew who was in their community. It was nearly 3 o'clock when Andre heard the crunch of tires on gravel. He looked up from where he was examining the foundation of the house to see a police cruiser pulling into his driveway. His initial thought was that they were just patrolling the area, maybe checking in on a property that had been vacant for a while. He set down his clipboard and walked toward the cruiser, ready to introduce himself as the new owner. 2 officers stepped out of the car. Both were white men, one older with graying hair at his temples, the other younger with a clean-shaven face and rigid posture. Their hands rested casually near their holsters, a detail Andre immediately noticed from his years of law enforcement training. "Afternoon." "Officers," Andre called out, keeping his tone friendly but careful to keep his hands visible at his sides. "Can I help you with something?" The older officer spoke first. "We got a call about someone trespassing on this property. The neighbors reported suspicious activity." Andre felt a flicker of surprise followed by a familiar sinking feeling. He'd experienced situations like this before, but never on his own property. "There must be some misunderstanding," he said, maintaining his calm tone. "I'm Andre Wilson. I just bought this place last week. Closed on Monday." The younger officer's posture didn't relax. "Do you have any ID on you, sir?" "Yes, of course." Andre reached slowly toward his back pocket where his wallet was stored. "My driver's license is in my wallet, and I have the property deed inside the house if you need to see it." "Keep your hands where we can see them," the younger officer said sharply. "Turn around slowly and place your hands on the wall." Andre froze, confusion and disbelief washing over him. "Officer, this is my property. I'm not trespassing. If you'd just let me show you my identification." "Sir, we need you to comply with our instructions now." The older officer cut in, his hand moving closer to his weapon. "Turn around and place your hands on the wall." Years of FBI training kicked in. Andre knew that arguing could escalate the situation. And despite the anger and humiliation building inside him, he turned slowly and placed his hands on the exterior wall of his own home. The rough brick scraped against his palms as the younger officer approached and patted him down. "My wallet is in my right back pocket," Andre said, keeping his voice steady. "My FBI credentials are in my truck in the glove compartment." The officer pulled out Andre's wallet and flipped it open, examining his driver's license. "FBI," he said with obvious skepticism. "Right." The older officer took the license and studied it, then looked at Andre with narrowed eyes. "This address doesn't match the property." "Like I said, I just bought this place last week," Andre explained patiently. "I haven't updated my license yet. The deed is inside and my credentials are in my truck. I'm a cybersecurity specialist with the FBI's field office downtown." A second patrol car pulled into the driveway, lights flashing but no siren. Andre felt his heart sink further as 2 more officers stepped out. This was quickly becoming a scene, and he was painfully aware of how it looked. A black man being questioned by police on a nice property in a predominantly white neighborhood. "What's going on here?" One of the new officers called out as they approached. "Possible trespasser," the younger officer replied. "Claims he owns the place, but his ID doesn't match the address." Andre took a deep breath. "Officers, I understand you're doing your job, but this is a misunderstanding. I am the legal owner of this property. I have documentation inside and federal credentials in my vehicle." The older officer who had first arrived seemed to hesitate, perhaps registering the calm, professional way Andre spoke. "Why don't we go check out those credentials you mentioned?" Before Andre could respond, the younger officer cut in. "How does someone like you afford a place like this anyway?" The question hung in the air, its implication unmistakable. Andre felt a flash of anger but kept his expression neutral. 15 years in law enforcement had taught him how quickly situations could deteriorate, especially for someone who looked like him. "I've been with the FBI for 15 years, Andre replied evenly. "I saved for a long time to buy this place. Now, can I show you my credentials and the property deed so we can clear this up?" One of the newly arrived officers, a woman with short brown hair, stepped forward. "Let's see the credentials first." With the officers following closely behind him, Andre walked to his truck. He could feel the eyes of neighbors watching from across the street, where a small group had begun to gather. Some had phones out recording the scene. The humiliation burned in his chest, but he kept his movements slow and deliberate as he reached into the glove compartment and retrieved his FBI badge and ID card. The female officer examined them carefully, then passed them to her colleagues. There was a subtle shift in their demeanor as they realized the credentials were genuine. "I still need to see proof this is your property," the older officer said, though his tone had softened slightly. Andre led them to the front door, unlocked it with his key, and stepped inside. He retrieved the property deed from his briefcase in the kitchen and handed it over. The officers huddled together, examining the document while Andre stood silently, feeling like a stranger in his own home. "Looks like everything checks out," the female officer finally said. She turned to Andre with an apologetic expression. "Sorry for the confusion, Agent Wilson. We were just responding to a call." "I understand," Andre replied, though the words tasted bitter. "You were doing your job." The younger officer, who had been the most aggressive, showed no sign of remorse. He handed back Andre's documents with a curt nod and walked out without a word. The others followed, murmuring awkward apologies. Andre stood in the doorway watching as they spoke briefly to the small crowd that had gathered before driving away. Some neighbors lingered, staring at him with open curiosity. One older man shook his head and walked back toward his house across the street. Alone again, Andre closed the door and leaned against it, letting out a long breath. The excitement he had felt about working on his new home had evaporated. In its place was a familiar weariness, the burden of constantly having to prove he belonged, even in spaces he rightfully owned. He walked to the kitchen and poured himself a glass of water, hands slightly shaking with the adrenaline that was still coursing through his system. As an FBI agent, he'd been on both sides of law enforcement interactions. He understood protocol and procedure, but today, none of his credentials or professional experience had mattered at first glance. What the officers had seen was simply a black man who, in their eyes, didn't belong. Andre looked around at the empty house, the house that represented years of hard work and saving, and wondered if this would be an isolated incident or the first of many. Either way, he refused to let it change his plans or diminish his pride in what he had accomplished. He picked up his phone and saw 3 missed calls from his sister. For a moment, he considered not telling his family about what had happened. His mother would worry, his sisters would be outraged. But as he stood in the kitchen of his new Andre's phone call with his sister Tamika lasted nearly an hour. She'd been furious when he told her about the police confrontation, threatening to drive out to the property herself. "This is exactly why Mom worried about you buying a place out there," she said, her voice tight with anger. "Those neighborhoods have a way of letting you know you're not welcome." "I'm not going to let them push me out," Andre replied, looking out the window at his property. The police cars were long gone, but a couple of neighbors still lingered on the street, occasionally glancing toward his house. "I worked too hard for this place." After calming his sister down and promising to call their mother later, Andre hung up and tried to refocus on his renovation plans. But the incident had left him rattled, the peaceful feeling of ownership now tainted. He decided to continue working despite what had happened. He refused to let the confrontation drive him away from his own property. Andre stepped outside to finish the yard work he'd started earlier. Almost immediately, he noticed a police cruiser driving slowly past his property. It wasn't one of the cars from before, but the message was clear. He was being watched. Andre straightened his back and continued working, determined not to be intimidated. About 30 minutes later, a truck pulled into his driveway. Andre tensed, setting down his rake and watching as an older black man stepped out. The man was in his 60s, wearing work boots and a plaid button-up shirt. "You must be the new owner," the man called out, his voice friendly but cautious. "I'm Harold Thomas. Live about half a mile down the road." Andre relaxed slightly and walked over to shake the man's hand. "Andre Wilson. Just closed on the place last week." Harold nodded, glancing around at the property. "Heard there was some trouble earlier. Police cars and such?" "News travels fast," Andre said with a wry smile. "Always does around here." Harold's expression grew serious. "Thought I'd come by, introduce myself. Let you know not everyone around here is calling the cops on new neighbors." Andre appreciated the gesture more than he could express. "Thanks for that. Been a strange first week of homeownership, that's for sure." They chatted for a few minutes about the property, with Harold offering advice about local contractors and sharing some history of the area. As they talked, another car slowed as it passed, the driver staring openly at them. Harold shook his head. "Been living out here 25 years, and some folks still look at me like I'm lost whenever I step outside my own yard." "Does it ever get easier?" Andre asked. "Not easier," Harold replied. "You just get better at handling it." He glanced at his watch. "I should get going. My wife's expecting me back for dinner, but listen, if you need anything, I'm just down the road. Got my number?" Andre took Harold's phone number, thanking him again for stopping by. The brief interaction had lifted his spirits somewhat, a reminder that not everyone in the area shared the same prejudices. As evening approached, Andre decided to stay at the property overnight, rather than return to his apartment as planned. It was a point of principle now. This was his home and he wouldn't be chased away. The house wasn't fully furnished yet, but he had a sleeping bag in his truck and didn't mind roughing it for one night. After a simple dinner of sandwiches from his cooler, Andre sat on the front porch steps watching as darkness fell over his land. The confrontation with the police kept replaying in his mind. As an FBI agent, he'd witnessed similar scenarios from the other side. Law enforcement responding to calls that, in retrospect, were clearly motivated by racial bias rather than genuine concern. But experiencing it firsthand on property he legally owned brought the reality of it into sharper focus. A movement caught his eye, headlights turning into his driveway. Andre stood up, instantly alert as a police SUV pulled to a stop. His hand instinctively moved toward his phone, ready to record if necessary. The driver's door opened and a uniformed officer stepped out. In the dim porch light, Andre recognized him as the aggressive younger officer from earlier in the day. His stomach tightened. "Mr. Wilson," the officer called out, walking toward the porch. "Didn't expect to find you still here." "It's my property," Andre replied evenly. "I decided to stay the night." The officer stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. "Just doing a routine patrol, checking on properties in the area." Andre doubted that was the full truth. "I appreciate the concern, Officer Daniels." "Officer Daniels. Officer Daniels. But as you can see, everything's fine here." Daniels nodded but made no move to leave. "You know, we don't get many new folks moving into this area, especially people from the city." The implication hung in the air between them. Andre considered his response carefully. As tempting as it was to confront the obvious prejudice, he knew escalating the situation wouldn't help. "Well, I'm looking forward to becoming part of the community," he said instead, "getting to know my neighbors." "Right." Officer Daniels glanced around the property. "You planning to live here alone? No family?" "Just me for now," Andre replied, increasingly uncomfortable with the questioning. "Is there something specific I can help you with tonight, officer?" Before Daniels could respond, the radio on his shoulder crackled to life. He listened to the dispatcher, then looked back at Andre. "Looks like I'm needed elsewhere." "You have a good night, Mr. Wilson." "You too, officer." Andre watched as Daniels returned to his vehicle and drove away, the red taillights disappearing down the dark road. The encounter left him with an uneasy feeling. It hadn't been an explicit threat, but the message was clear enough. He was being watched. Inside the house, Andre unrolled his sleeping bag in what would eventually be the living room. He sent a quick text to his supervisor at the FBI, mentioning the incident with local police. It wasn't an official complaint, just a heads up in case anything escalated. Given his position, it seemed wise to create a record. Sleep came fitfully that night. Every distant car engine or creak of the old house woke him. By dawn, Andre was already up, making coffee on the camping stove he'd brought. Despite the uncomfortable night, he was more determined than ever to make this place his home. As he sat on the porch with his coffee, watching the sun rise over his property, Andre noticed another police cruiser driving slowly past. This time it was the female officer from yesterday. She nodded at him as she passed. Not friendly exactly, but at least acknowledging his right to be there. Andre's phone rang. It was his supervisor, Tom, calling much earlier than usual. "Got your text," Tom said after a brief greeting. "Wanted to check in. You okay out there?" Andre gave him a quick rundown of what had happened, keeping his tone professional despite his lingering anger. "Sounds like a mess," Tom said when he finished. "Want me to make some calls?" "The sheriff out there is someone I've worked with before." Andre considered the offer. Having his FBI supervisor intervene might solve the immediate problem, but it wouldn't address the underlying issues. Not yet, he decided. "Let me try to handle this my way first." After hanging up, Andre noticed a car pulling into his driveway. Not a police vehicle this time, but a silver sedan. A middle-aged white woman stepped out, carrying what looked like a small gift basket. "Hello there," she called out with forced cheerfulness. "I'm Louise Peterson from the Neighborhood Welcome Committee. Just thought I'd stop by and introduce myself." Andre wasn't naive enough to believe there was actually a welcome committee in this rural area, but he appreciated the gesture nonetheless. He walked down to greet her. "Andre Wilson," he said, extending his hand. "Thanks for stopping by." Louise handed him the basket, which contained some local honey, homemade bread, and a pamphlet about the area. "We're a tight-knit community out here," she said, her eyes darting nervously around the property. "Everyone looks out for each other." "I noticed," Andre replied dryly. Louise had the grace to look embarrassed. "Yes, well, about yesterday. I want to apologize for how that was handled. Some people are just a bit jumpy when they see strangers around." "I'm not a stranger," Andre pointed out. "I'm a homeowner just like you." Of course, Louise said quickly. "And we're very happy to have you. It's just, change can be difficult for some folks." Andre understood what she wasn't saying. His presence as a black man in this predominantly white neighborhood was the change people were struggling with. "I appreciate the welcome basket," he said, deciding not to make the conversation any more uncomfortable than it already was. "Looking forward to getting to know everyone better under more normal circumstances." Louise seemed relieved. "Well, I should get going. Let me know if you need anything. We're just up the road in the White House with the green shutters." As she drove away, Andre noticed another neighbor watching from across the street, not even pretending to be doing anything else. He waved directly at the man, who quickly turned and went back inside his house. Andre's phone buzzed with a text from Harold. "How'd you make it through the night? Still standing?" The simple message of solidarity made Andre smile. He texted back, "Still here. No plans to leave." Setting down the welcome basket, Andre surveyed his property in the morning light. The house needed work, the yard was half finished, and some of his neighbors clearly didn't want him there. But looking at the land, his land, Andre felt a renewed sense of purpose. He wouldn't just renovate a house here. He would make a point. Every board he replaced, every nail he drove, would be an act of defiance against those who thought they could intimidate him into leaving. This property wasn't just a home anymore. It was a statement. Andre rolled up his sleeves and got to work. There was much to do, and he wasn't going anywhere. By the end of the weekend, Andre had made significant progress on the property. The yard looked considerably better with the grass cut and the walkways cleared. He'd also begun preliminary demolition inside, removing the damaged drywall in what would eventually be his home office. Despite the uncomfortable encounters with the police and some neighbors, he was determined to make this place his home. Sunday evening, Andre packed up his truck to head back to his apartment in the city. He had an early meeting at the FBI office the next morning, a briefing on a major cybersecurity operation that had been months in planning. As he locked up the house, he noticed Officer Daniels driving by again, slowing as he passed. Andre simply nodded in acknowledgement and continued loading his truck. Heading back to the city? A voice called out. Andre turned to see Harold walking toward him from the road. Yeah, I got work tomorrow, Andre replied, closing his truck's tailgate. Early start. Harold leaned against the truck, lowering his voice. Wanted to give you a heads up. Been hearing talk around town about the new city guy who bought the old Miller place. Some folks are asking questions, wondering what your story is. Andre wasn't surprised. Let me guess, they're wondering how I can afford this place. Harold nodded grimly. That and why you'd want to live out here in the first place. Just thought you should know what you're walking into. I appreciate that, Andre said sincerely, but I can handle small-town gossip. It's more than gossip when the sheriff's department gets involved, Harold warned. Daniels has been asking around about you, and he's got friends on the force. This was concerning but not entirely unexpected. Andre had dealt with similar situations before, though never as the target. Thanks for the warning. I'll keep my eyes open. After Harold left, Andre sat in his truck for a few minutes thinking. He'd hoped to keep his FBI work separate from his private life here, at least initially, but it seemed the local police were determined to make that impossible. He started the engine and headed back toward the city, his mind already planning how to handle the situation when he returned next weekend. Monday morning arrived with a flurry of activity at the FBI field office. Andre's team was finalizing details for a major operation, targeting a network of hackers who had been attacking critical infrastructure around the country. The case had consumed much of Andre's time over the past 6 months, and it was finally coming to a head. Wilson, got a minute? His supervisor, Tom Reynolds, called from his office doorway. Andre followed Tom into his office, expecting a discussion about the upcoming operation. Instead, Tom closed the door and gestured for Andre to sit. Got a call from Sheriff Baldwin out in your new neck of the woods, Tom said without preamble. Seems there's been some interest in you from his department. Andre straightened in his chair. What kind of interest? He claims they're just doing routine checks on new property owners, but it sounds like more than that to me. Tom leaned back in his chair. Want to tell me what's really going on? Andre recounted the confrontations with the local police, including Officer Daniels' repeated drive-bys. Tom listened without interrupting, his expression darkening. This is harassment, plain and simple, Tom said when Andre finished. And it stops now. I told Baldwin who you are and what you do, but I don't think that message has filtered down to his officers yet. I was hoping to handle this myself, Andre admitted. Sometimes you need to use the weight of the badge, Tom replied. You've earned that right. I'm not suggesting you flaunt your position, but these officers need to understand they're harassing a federal agent. Andre nodded, though he had mixed feelings. He'd never wanted special treatment because of his job. At the same time, he was tired of being treated like a criminal on his own property. Focus on the operation this week, Tom advised. We'll deal with the local police situation before you head back out there this weekend. The week passed quickly with Andre deeply immersed in the cybersecurity operation. By Friday afternoon, they had successfully identified and tracked the primary targets, with arrests scheduled for the following week. It was a major win for the team, and despite the ongoing situation with his property, Andre felt a sense of professional satisfaction. As he was preparing to leave for the weekend, Tom stopped by his desk. Just got off the phone with Sheriff Baldwin again. Apparently, there's been some chatter about suspicious activity at your property. Sounds like another neighbor called it in. Andre felt his jaw tighten. What now? Baldwin assured me he'd handle it personally, but I'm not taking any chances. I'm coming with you this weekend. Tom held up a hand when Andre started to protest. This isn't just about you anymore. It's about respect between law enforcement agencies. Andre knew better than to argue. Tom had been with the FBI for over 20 years and didn't make such offers lightly. I appreciate that. Planning to head out there first thing tomorrow morning. Saturday dawned bright and clear. Andre arrived at his property around 9 with Tom following in his own car. They had just begun unloading tools when a police cruiser pulled into the driveway, followed by a larger SUV with the county sheriff's emblem on its side. Officer Daniels stepped out of the cruiser, his expression souring when he spotted Andre. 2 more officers emerged from the back. From the SUV, an older man in a tan sheriff's uniform approached, presumably Sheriff Baldwin himself. Andre and Tom walked forward to meet them. Andre could sense the tension immediately as Daniels recognized Tom from previous joint operations between local law enforcement and the FBI. "Mr. Wilson," Daniels began, his tone formal. "We've received another report of suspicious activity on this property. Neighbors reported lights inside the house late last night." "That's interesting," Andre replied calmly, "since I was in the city all night and just arrived." The sheriff stepped forward, extending his hand. "Andre Wilson? I'm Sheriff Robert Baldwin. Sorry about the confusion here." Andre shook his hand, noting how the sheriff emphasized his first name, a small but deliberate show of respect that Daniels had never offered. "No problem, Sheriff. This is my supervisor from the FBI field office, Tom Reynolds." Baldwin nodded to Tom. "We spoke on the phone. Again, I apologize for the situation. Seems there's been some miscommunication." Daniels shifted uncomfortably but maintained his stance. "With all due respect, Sheriff, we still need to check out the report. Procedure demands—" "I'm familiar with procedure, Officer Daniels," Baldwin cut in. "Just as I'm familiar with Agent Wilson's credentials, which I personally verified earlier this week." Turned back to Andre. "Though, I would have appreciated knowing we had an FBI agent moving into our jurisdiction beforehand. I was hoping to keep my work and private life separate," Andre explained. "But that seems increasingly difficult." Baldwin nodded in understanding. "Well, now that we're all on the same page, I think we can put this matter to rest." He gave Daniels a pointed look. "No need for further routine patrols of Agent Wilson's property, understood?" Daniels' face flushed with anger or embarrassment, possibly both. "Yes, sir." As the conversation continued, Andre noticed a group of neighbors gathering across the street, watching the interaction with obvious interest. Among them was the woman who had brought the welcome basket, Louise, and the older woman he'd seen staring from a passing car that first day. Their expressions ranged from curiosity to dismay as they observed the sheriff and his officers speaking with Andre and Tom. After a few more minutes of conversation, mostly between Tom and Sheriff Baldwin about upcoming joint training opportunities between their agencies, the police vehicles prepared to leave. Before they did, Baldwin pulled Andre aside. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry about how this was handled," he said quietly. "Some of my officers need more training on community relations. And some of your neighbor—" He glanced toward the small crowd still watching. "Well, let's just say change comes slow around here." "I understand," Andre replied. "And I'm not looking to make waves. I just want to renovate my house and live peacefully." Baldwin nodded. "If you have any more trouble from anyone, call me directly." He handed Andre a card with his personal number. As the police vehicles drove away, Andre could see Officer Daniels in the passenger seat of the cruiser, staring back at him with an unreadable expression. The confrontation was over for now, but Andre sensed this wouldn't be the last of it. The gathered neighbors began to disperse once the police left, though not before Andre caught snippets of their conversation. FBI agent and never would have guessed being the most distinct phrases. The revelation of his profession had clearly changed the dynamic. "Well, that should keep them off your back for a while," Tom said, watching the last police car disappear down the road. "Maybe," Andre replied, "or it just gives them a new reason to watch me." Harold approached from across the street, a broad smile on his face. "An FBI agent, huh? No wonder you weren't too worried about Daniels and his intimidation tactics." Andre shrugged. "It shouldn't matter what I do for a living. No one deserves to be harassed on their own property." "True enough," Harold agreed. "But around here, that badge is going to make a difference." He glanced toward the dispersing neighbors. "Watch how quickly some of these folks change their tune now." As if on cue, Louise began walking toward them, her expression much friendlier than before. "Looks like you're about to get another welcome," Tom said with barely concealed amusement. Andre sighed. "This isn't how I wanted to start things here. I didn't want special treatment because of my job. I just wanted to be treated like any other homeowner." "Sometimes you need to use what you have to change people's perceptions," Harold said wisely. "Once they get to know you as a person, the badge won't matter so much. But for now, if it makes them think twice about calling the cops every time you mow your lawn, I'd count that as progress." Andre nodded, recognizing the truth in Harold's words. The FBI wasn't just his job, it was part of who he was. And perhaps here in this new community it could be a bridge rather than a barrier. Louise arrived, slightly breathless. "Agent Wilson, I had no idea. You must think we're all terrible neighbors after what happened. Andre smiled politely. It's just Andre. And no, I don't think that at all. New faces take some getting used to in any community. As Louise launched into an extended apology and an offer to host a proper neighborhood welcome party, Andre caught Tom and Harold exchanging knowing looks. The revelation of his FBI status had changed everything. For better or worse remained to be seen. News traveled fast in small communities. By Sunday afternoon, everyone within a 5-mile radius seemed to know that the new owner of the old Miller property was an FBI agent. Andre noticed the change immediately. The suspicious glances had been replaced with curious stares, and several neighbors who had previously ignored him now waved enthusiastically when they drove past. Quite the turnaround, Tom commented as they worked on replacing the rotted boards on the back deck. He had stayed the weekend as promised, sleeping on an air mattress in what would eventually be the guest room. Amazing what a badge can do, Andre replied, unable to keep the sarcasm from his voice. Suddenly I'm not a threat anymore. People are complicated, Tom said, hammering in a nail with perhaps more force than necessary. They categorize others to make sense of the world. You've just been moved from one category to another in their minds. Andre nodded, thinking about Tom's words as they continued working. The revelation of his profession had indeed shifted people's perceptions, but it didn't erase what had happened. He still remembered the feeling of being forced to place his hands against the wall of his own home, the humiliation of having to prove he belonged on his own property. Around noon, a truck pulled into the driveway. Harold stepped out carrying a large cooler. Thought you boys might be hungry, he called out, setting the cooler on the ground. My wife sent some lunch over. Andre put down his tools and walked over to greet his neighbor. That's really kind of you, Harold. This is my supervisor, Tom. The FBI big shot who scared the pants off Daniels, Harold said with a grin, shaking Tom's hand. Word travels fast around here. They sat on the newly repaired section of the deck, eating the sandwiches and homemade potato salad Harold's wife had prepared. The conversation flowed easily, with Harold sharing stories about the area's history and the characters who lived nearby. So what happens now? Harold asked eventually, his tone growing serious. With Daniels and the others who gave you trouble? Andre had been asking himself the same question all weekend. I'm still figuring that out, he admitted. Part of me wants to file an official complaint, make sure there are consequences. But another part just wants to move forward, focus on building a life here. Harold nodded thoughtfully. No easy answer to that one. But whatever you decide, you've got allies now. He glanced at his watch. Speaking of which, the Petersons are hosting a barbecue this afternoon. Louise asked me to officially invite you both. Tom raised an eyebrow. The same Louise who was part of the welcome committee. The very same, Harold confirmed with a knowing look. Seems she's eager to make amends now that she knows Andre works for the FBI. Andre hesitated. The invitation felt like it was extended to his badge rather than to him as a person. At the same time, it was an opportunity to change perceptions, to let his neighbors see him as more than just his job title. I think we should go, Tom said, reading Andre's expression. Show them you're here to stay, badge or no badge. All right, Andre agreed after a moment. But we're not staying long. I've got an early start tomorrow. The Petersons' backyard was crowded by the time they arrived that afternoon. At least 20 people stood in small groups drinking beer and soda while children played on a swing set in the corner. A large grill sizzled with burgers and hot dogs, manned by a man Andre assumed was Mr. Peterson. The conversation stopped momentarily as Andre and Tom walked through the gate, then resumed with an artificial loudness. Louise hurried over, her smile wide and welcoming. Agent Wilson and Agent Reynolds, so glad you could join us, she gushed, taking their arms and guiding them toward the food tables. Everyone's been so excited to meet you properly. Just Andre, please, he reminded her gently. And we're off duty today. Of course, Louise said, though she continued to introduce him as Agent Wilson from the FBI to everyone they encountered. The next hour was awkward, but enlightening. Some neighbors seemed genuinely interested in getting to know Andre beyond his profession, asking about his renovation plans and offering recommendations for local contractors. Others were clearly just curious about his work, peppering him with questions about famous cases and whether the FBI was really like it appeared in movies. Andre answered politely but deflected many of the questions. He noticed Officer Daniels' name came up several times, with veiled references to his overzealousness and by-the-book approach. No one directly mentioned the incident on Andre's property, though it clearly lingered in everyone's minds. As the afternoon wore on, Andre found himself in conversation with an older gentleman named Frank, who had lived in the area for over 40 years. Used to know the Millers well, Frank said, referring to the previous owners of Andre's property. Good people. Would have been happy to know their place went to someone like you, someone like me. Andre couldn't help asking. Someone who respects the property, Frank clarified. Too many city folks buy land out here and then try to change everything about it. But you seem to understand the value of what you've got. Andre was surprised by the observation. It was perhaps the first comment all day that had nothing to do with his job. I do value it, he agreed. That's why what happened last weekend was so frustrating. Being treated like I didn't belong on land I worked hard to buy. Frank nodded, his expression turning serious. What happened to you wasn't right, and it wasn't the first time something like that has happened around here. He glanced toward where Sheriff Baldwin had just arrived at the barbecue. Might be worth having a longer conversation with the sheriff about it. He's newer to the area, trying to make changes in the department. Andre followed Frank's gaze, considering the suggestion. Before he could respond, Tom appeared at his side. Ready to head out? Tom asked quietly. I need to get back to the city tonight. They said their goodbyes, with Louise extracting a promise from Andre to attend the next community event. As they walked back to Andre's property, Tom shared his impressions. Mixed bag, he observed. Some genuine people, some just nosy, and a few who still aren't sure what to make of you. Pretty much what I expected, Andre replied. At least they're not calling the cops on me anymore. The following week brought unexpected developments. On Tuesday, Andre received a call from Sheriff Baldwin asking to meet. They arranged to have coffee at a diner halfway between the FBI office and the sheriff's department. I've been doing some thinking since our conversation, Baldwin said once they were seated. And some investigating, too. What happened on your property wasn't an isolated incident. The sheriff slid a folder across the table. Inside were reports of similar incidents. Local police responding to calls about suspicious persons, who turned out to be legitimate homeowners or visitors, most of them people of color. Officer Daniels' name appears in most of these reports, Andre noted, flipping through the pages. Baldwin nodded grimly. It's a pattern I can't ignore anymore. I've put him on administrative leave pending a review. Andre looked up in surprise. That's a significant step. It's overdue, Baldwin admitted. But your case brought it to a he. First, the fact that your FBI made it impossible to sweep under the rug like these other incidents. He gestured to the folder. Which is exactly why I wanted to meet with you. What are you suggesting? I want to implement new training for my officers. Cultural awareness, unconscious bias, proper procedure for responding to these types of calls. Baldwin leaned forward. And I could use someone with your experience to help develop it. Andre hadn't expected this. You want me to train your officers? I want you to help me change the culture, Baldwin clarified. You've seen both sides now. Law enforcement and being on the receiving end of biased policing. That perspective is valuable. Over the next month, Andre divided his time between his FBI duties, renovating his new home, and consulting with Sheriff Baldwin on the new training program. The work was challenging but rewarding. Some officers, including Daniels, resisted the changes, but others embraced the opportunity to improve their approach to community policing. By the time summer arrived, Andre's house was nearly finished. The exterior had been repainted, the interior updated, and the barn converted into a home office. He had gradually gotten to know more of his neighbors, forming genuine connections that went beyond his job title. Harold and his wife had become close friends, often joining Andre for dinner on his newly rebuilt deck. One evening, as Andre sat on his porch watching the sunset, a familiar police cruiser pulled into his driveway. It was Officer Daniels, now back on active duty after completing the required training and a probationary period. Andre tensed slightly as Daniels approached the porch. Their paths had crossed during the training sessions, but they hadn't spoken directly about what had happened that first weekend. Evening, Wilson, Daniels said, stopping at the bottom of the steps. His tone wasn't exactly friendly, but it lacked the hostility of their previous encounters. Evening, Officer Daniels, Andre replied evenly. What brings you out this way? Daniels seemed to struggle with his next words. Sheriff asked me to check in with all the residents on my patrol route. New community outreach initiative, he paused. Your place is looking good. Thanks, Andre said. Been a lot of work, but worth it? An awkward silence stretched between them. Finally, Daniels cleared his throat. Look, about what happened when you first moved in. Andre waited, curious to see where this was going. I made assumptions I shouldn't have, Daniels continued. The training program, it's made me look at some things differently. It wasn't quite an apology, but it was more than Andre had expected. We all have assumptions we need to examine, he said carefully. The important thing is being willing to do that work. Daniels nodded. Well, that's all I wanted to say. Have a good evening. As the officer returned to his cruiser, Andre felt a cautious optimism. The incident that had begun his time here had led to real changes, not just in how his neighbors perceived him, but potentially in how local law enforcement approached their duties. His phone buzzed with a text from Tom. How's life in the country treating you these days? Andre looked around at his property, truly his home now, and typed his reply. Getting better all the time. Still have work to do, but we're making progress. And that, he reflected as the last light faded from the sky, was the best anyone could hope for. Not perfection, but progress. One step, one conversation, one mind at a time.